Good afternoon. Welcome to the second part of a two-part series that I've put together to try and explain what is happening behind the scenes. I want us to start the study off by turning to 2 Thessalonians chapter 2, and I'm going to start reading from verse 3. Don't let anyone deceive you in any way, for that day will not come until the rebellion occurs and the man of lawlessness is revealed, the man doomed to destruction. Right here we see clearly that Paul says before the second coming of Christ can take place, two main events are going to be experienced. The first one is that there is going to be a rebellion. Now, it's not my intention to look at that and to focus on what that is all about. But basically it means that decisions are going to be made. But the second point that Paul draws our attention to is that of the man of lawlessness, and that this man of lawlessness is going to be revealed. Now I want you to notice that in verse 7, Paul writes further, "For the secret power of lawlessness is already at work." So something we need to understand, it's not something that is still going to happen in the future, but that this man of lawlessness, this person that's doing these things, he's already busy. It's not something that we can expect still to happen. The difference is that this man of lawlessness is going to be revealed. Do you understand that? It says in verse 5, "Don't you remember that when I was with you, I used to tell you these things?" So Paul is saying, I told you about this before. Then he says in verse 6, "And now you know what is holding him back, so that he may be revealed at the proper time." Now, dear friends, something that's very important for us to understand is that up to a certain time in the experience of this world, the devil has been allowed to do his things in disguise with smoke and mirrors. He's been able to carry out what he's doing, but the word clearly teaches us that that time when he could do all those things in darkness is about to be revealed. It will be revealed before Jesus comes. And the importance of this revelation or this exposure of what the man of lawlessness is doing is so that we will be able to make better decisions. We will be able to be fair in the decisions that we make. And we discovered in our first part series that this man of lawlessness was the enemy of the Son of Man, and the enemy of the Son of Man, as Jesus himself identifies, was the devil. Now, I would like to take you to a scene that is very important, that helps to understand what this is all about. What is really going on behind the scenes. And the book that I would like to take you to is a book that is as old as the book of Genesis. Now, the book of Genesis was the very first book that Moses wrote in order to explain to us the creation acts of God. At the same time, it is understood amongst the theologians that the book of Job was written also, and that the person who wrote the book of Job was none other than Moses. Now, the reason why I'm drawing your attention to this is that in Genesis, which is the book of beginnings, our attention is drawn to the creative acts of God, the introduction of man, man's fall into sin, etc. And yet, something about that is not clear. We see in the garden, in Genesis chapter 3, that the serpent comes and he speaks to the woman. But there already we see that the man of lawlessness is the devil. Now, how do I know that this serpent that speaks to the woman is actually the devil? Well, in Revelation, and I'd like you to turn with me to that, in Revelation chapter 12, which is the war chapter as I've indicated to you, the devil is revealed and the disguises that he's used is given to us. So in Revelation chapter 12, we read these words. It says there, and I want to read it to you from verse 7. So Revelation chapter 12, verse 7. It says, "And there was war in heaven. Michael and his angels fought against the dragon, and the dragon and his angels fought back." So as we found out in part 1, there are two role players in this whole thing. The Son of Man, or the Son of God, which is Jesus, and we find the devil, who was a covering cherub created by God, is the one who is his enemy, the one who became Satan, and Satan basically meaning the one who opposes God. So we see in Revelation chapter 12 that we are introduced to the two parties. And yet one of the things that the devil has successfully done up to this time is he's acted out his role in different disguises. And I want you to see here that in verse 9, some of these disguises are revealed. The great dragon was hurled down. So the dragon who fought against Christ was hurled down. And then it starts off by saying that ancient serpent called the devil or Satan. So right there in the garden, the one who actually is tempting Eve to eat from the tree that they were not allowed to eat from is none other than the enemy of God. It is none other than Satan. It is none other than the devil. The one who's tried to place himself in the place of God. So as we discovered in 2 Thessalonians chapter 2, this man of lawlessness has already been active and busy. And we find out that although he started in heaven, right in the beginning, in the fall of man, he was there in that place. And then, of course, right throughout, even the temptations of Christ, he is constantly revealed as the one who is tempting man to fall. It's always the devil. Now, somehow in the New Testament, whenever certain things happened, it was clear that it was the devil, it was demons who possessed people. And demons are basically these fallen angels, those who have chosen to be with Lucifer. It's interesting, if you read Revelation chapter 12, that it says there regarding him, and I want to read this to you, it's Revelation chapter 12, verse 4. His tail swept a third of the stars out of the sky and flung them to the earth. Now the Bible clearly teaches that stars in God's word, or in prophecy, particularly in the book of Revelation, the stars basically are angels. Okay, so maybe I should not just tell you that. Let me give you actual verses that back that. In Revelation chapter 1, we read about 7 stars that are found in the hands of Christ. And then Christ himself reveals this. He says in Revelation chapter 1, verse 20, "The mystery of the 7 stars that you saw in my right hand and of the 7 golden lampstands is this." Then he says, "The 7 stars are the angels of the 7 churches." So right here, when we talk about the serpent hooking a third of the stars out of heaven with his tail, we are actually referring to a third of the angelic host that existed at that time, fell with Lucifer, sided with Lucifer, and came down to planet Earth. And those are none other than the demons that have formed an allegiance with him. And they all have certain things in common. And that is that they are liars, and that they are murderers, and they act in different disguises. I want you to understand this. So in the book of Genesis, we are introduced to the devil and how that he's busy. And in 2 Thessalonians, Paul clearly tells us that the man of lawlessness has always been busy, but in the end, he is going to be revealed. And I want you to understand this. Before the end can come, before the second coming can take place, people need to be given a fair option of knowing what's really going on behind the scenes so that they can make the choices that they have to. It's Mount Carmel all over again. It's where we have the Baal prophets on the one side and we have Elijah on the other side, and everybody is wondering who the true God is. And the Baal prophets are trying to present their God as the true God, and then finally Elijah steps forward, and the interesting thing is that God is revealed as the true God when fire is brought down from heaven, which consumes the sacrifice as well as the water that was put around it. But I want you to notice something here, and you can go and check up on this in 1 Kings chapter 18. But I want you to understand something here, that in Revelation chapter 13, the devil does something which is very interesting. Now, it's a beast, it's a second beast described in Revelation chapter 13. And this beast is a beast that behaves or looks like a lamb, but speaks like a dragon. And the interesting thing is that we know who the dragon is here. It's the devil. So although it looks like a lamb, although it looks innocent, it truly is not innocent. The dragon is speaking. But the point that I want you to notice here is, says in verse 13, and he performed great and miraculous signs. And then it says this, even causing fire to come down from heaven to earth in full view of men. Now, what this means is that the devil is going to try and convince people that he is truly God, because that's what God did in 1 Kings chapter 18 with the story of Mount Carmel. God revealed who he was by fire coming down from heaven, and the devil is going to perform the same thing. He's going to try and convince the world by doing the miracles that Christ did so as to deceive them and make them think that he is Jesus Christ. But this man of lawlessness, before he's allowed to do this, and remember, he's going to work in such a manner that if it was possible, as Christ says in Matthew 24, even the elect could have been deceived. But the reason why the elect is not deceived is because the man of lawlessness is going to be revealed. Okay, so we are going to be placed in a situation where we can clearly understand what's going on behind the scenes, and as a result make a proper choice. Now let me explain this, why I'm emphasizing this. The book of Job, as I indicated, was written about the same time that the book of Genesis was. But now the book of Job is really about a particular person, and his name is Job. And Job lived in the land of Uz, and there is speculation as you read about this, that if you talk about Abraham, which we do find after the flood a focus is on, it's similar that Job finds himself in the same time period, more or less, as that of Abraham. Okay, so I just wanted you just to see this. So we are looking right in the beginning of the experience of one of God's people. Now, Job chapter 1 starts off by saying this. And I'm going to read from verse 1. In the land of Uz, there lived a man whose name was Job. This man was blameless and upright. He feared God and shunned evil. Now, dear friends, I want you to notice right off here that we need to understand why this characteristic of Job is given. In Revelation chapter 12, where we talk about the war, it tells us that when the devil is not successful in his war against Christ, he then goes to make war with the remnant of her seed. And then it identifies who the remnant is. And those are the ones who keep the commandments of God and hold to the testimony of Jesus Christ. So in other words, we could actually say of those people who the devil is going to make war with, we can say that they were blameless and upright and feared God. Now the Bible teaches me that the fear of God is wisdom, and to shun evil is understanding. Now we go further and we read there that he had 7 sons, he had 3 daughters, he owned 7,000 sheep, 3,000. So we see that this man was a man living on planet Earth, going through the normal activities of life, except that maybe he was quite a wealthy man, influential man. And he had sons. But it's interesting that his sons and his daughters on several occasions performed acts perhaps that were not what God required, but he would in the mornings do sacrifices on their behalf for their sins. But now I want you to draw your attention to this. So we are introduced to the story about a man, and it's a real story, a man who actually lived in the time more or less of that of Abraham. He had 7 sons, and as it says there, 3 daughters, lots of possessions. He feared God and he shunned evil. For a moment, we are taken away from that scene, that particular description of who he was, how he behaved, etc. And then it's almost as if God focuses us on something that Job and his family, I want you to be aware of, are not conscious of. And that is the next scene. We are introduced to something going on behind which Job and his family are oblivious of. Again, I want you to understand that what we are going to see here is that the lawless one who's been actively busy is going to be revealed. Now, let me show you this. In chapter 1, in verse 6, we read this. One day the angels came to present themselves before the Lord, and Satan, the opposer of God, also came with them. Now it's interesting, and I don't want to get into debate as who the sons of God were here, but it says very clearly that they came to present themselves before God. And the interesting thing here is that when the sons of God came together before God, Satan, the opposer of God, is found to be there. Now I want you to listen to the dialogue that takes place. I don't want to get caught up as to what is this and what's this meeting. I want you to focus on the dialogue that takes place. Verse 7 says, the Lord said to Satan, "Where have you come from?" Satan answered the Lord, "From roaming through the earth and going back and forth on it." Now listen to this. God asks the question, where have you come from? The devil himself says, I've come from earth where I've been walking up and down on it. And it's interesting, he walks up and down on it because it's almost as if he owns it. Now the devil has taken this world over. In actual fact, Revelation chapter 18 tells me that this world has become a habitat of demons. Do you understand? A third of the stars that fell with Lucifer, a third of the angels, have made this place, this world of ours, their dwelling place. But the interesting thing is that they are working undercover. They are not visible so that we can see them. They are using instruments. They clothe themselves in darkness. But this darkness is going to be removed away, and the man of lawlessness is going to be revealed. So let's watch this story. Here we see that Job is oblivious to this. We have this discussion taking place. God is speaking to the devil. It's like God is real. We all agree on that. And if God is real, then this story about who the devil is, Satan, is also real. And where has he come from? He's come from planet Earth. But now I want you to notice how this conversation goes further. Then God asks him in verse 8, "Then the Lord said to Satan, the opposer of God, have you considered my servant Job?" Now that's interesting. God immediately looks at this person, Job, who we are introduced to, a man with 7 sons and 3 daughters and lots of possessions, a man who feared God, a man who was blameless and upright. We see that God draws Satan's attention to this man, this righteous man. But I want you to notice there's a reason why I want to emphasize this, is that God was aware of Job. You see, he refers to him as my servant. Very interesting here. Do you understand this? So we have this dialogue taking place, and then God says to him, "There is no one on earth like him." This is still verse 8. "He is blameless and upright. And then God says this of him, a man who fears God and shuns evil. Now, I want to use this phrase right here and help you to understand that there is a quality about Job that caught God's attention. And here we read, a man who fears God and shuns evil. Now, in order for us to understand this better, I want you to go with me to Job chapter 28. And I want you to see here that what we've just read, where God says about Job, he's a man who fears God and shuns evil. What does that mean? Job chapter 28, verse 28 says, and he said to man, the fear of the Lord, that is wisdom. So the fact that Job feared God means that he had wisdom. Then it says, and to shun evil is understanding. I want you to see this. So when God is talking about Job here, he's talking about a man who has wisdom and who has understanding. Do you see that? Okay, so he says, God says, have you considered my servant Job? There is no one on earth like him. He is blameless and upright, a man who fears God and shuns evil. Okay, we've got that. But notice the way in which Satan responds. Satan then turns around and says in verse 9, does Job fear God for nothing? Now he's talking about actually being scared, but it's the fear of God is not being scared. The fear of God, as we just discovered, is being wise or having wisdom. Do you understand? Satan replied, does Job not fear you for nothing? Have you not put a hedge around him and his household and everything he has? You see, what Satan is alluding to here is that the reason why Job listens to you and does what you tell him is that he is afraid of you, and you have protected him because he's afraid of you. And I want you to notice there's a reason why I'm bringing this out. You see, the world in general, or religious organizations, use fear to motivate people to believe in God. Do you understand? And that is a devil attribute. It's not a godly attribute. God does not try and through fear get you to do things to him, for him. And this is what he's saying Job does. Job fears God. And does he fear him for naught, as the Bible says? For nothing? No, he fears you because if you didn't protect him, you would allow bad things to happen to him. I want you to see this whole thing. The reason why Job fears you, as he says in verse 10, have you not put a hedge around him and his household and everything he has? Then Satan makes this comment. He says, you have blessed the work of his hands, so that his flocks and his herds are spread throughout the land. But then he says in verse 11, but stretch out your hand and strike everything he has, and he will surely curse you to your face. Now I want you to notice what the devil is asking God to do here. He's asking God to withdraw his protective hands and then to use those hands that were protecting him to inflict damage on Job, to punish Job, to cause Job to have strife and problems. Do you understand? He's saying if you do that, then Job will turn around and curse you to your face. But now I want you to listen. Does God do what Job says? Does God respond by withdrawing his hands and then cursing Job? No, he doesn't. By bringing Job, challenges on Job? No, listen to what verse 12 says. And we need to understand. Dear friends, this is what's going on behind the scenes. These horrible things that are happening in the world. This is not God. And I'm going to explain that. And yet a lot of people say these are the acts of God. I always get disturbed when I read in contracts that, they will protect you so far, but except for an act of God. And it's almost like when God brings rain or damage or destruction, it's God. And that's a false understanding of God. God's desires are not for your damage, but for a blessing to you. My thoughts, as God says, is to bless you, not to curse you. So we see here in verse 12, God responds to this proposal of the devil, of Satan, where he says, why don't you take away your hand of protection and rather smack him with that same hand, rather do damages to him. God responds in verse 12, and I want you to notice this. This is what's really going on behind the scenes. God says, the Lord said to Satan, do you understand this? This is God speaking now. Very well. Then everything he has is in your hands. Do you understand this? God says, I'm not going to whack him, but what I am going to do is I'm going to allow you to have access to everything that is his. It's in your hands. And he goes on, but on the man himself, do not lay a finger. God actually restrains him and says, you can do whatever you want to the things of Job, his possessions, his children, etc., but you can't touch the man himself. So we see here quite clearly, and I want you to notice, after this discussion, the Bible then says, then Satan went out from the presence of the Lord. Do you understand this? So let's have a look at this quickly, a recap. We have this description of this man Job, 7 sons, 3 daughters, a man of great possessions. Then we introduce to the next scene. And the next scene is God and the devil in discussion, and how that God refers to his servant Job. He's a righteous man, a man who's blameless, and then he says a man who fears God and shuns evil. And we've discussed that the person who fears God is the one who has wisdom, and the one who shuns evil is the one who has understanding. And we get all this, and then all of a sudden the devil turns around and says the reason why Job is following you and doing what you're saying is because you're always protecting him. But if you should withdraw your hand and smack him with the same hand that you withdrawn him with, he will curse you to your face. But then God turns around and he makes it very clear, Satan, I'm not going to do that, but everything is in your hands. So God, in some sense, is giving permission to the devil to do what the devil wishes to do. This is not God wishing to do it. He says, do with my servant as you see. And I want to make this very clear, dear friends. We are about to see the lawless one being revealed. Okay, notice what happens. Job is a man who fears God, who is in good standing with his fellow man. Then listen to this. Satan leaves God's presence. The next scene that we are introduced to. So we've gone through chapter 1, chapter 2, we're now in chapter 3. And chapter 3 says, verse 13, one day when Job's sons and daughters were feasting and drinking wine at the oldest brother's house, a messenger, verse 14, came to Job and said, so here's Job sitting and feasting and drinking. So it's like normal life. The Bible says, as it was in the days of Noah, so it'll be towards the end of time. They will be eating and drinking, marrying and giving in marriage. And here we find that what we are introduced is to a common scene. Life is as normal. But it's an interesting way this one starts off. It says one day. And it's almost as if we are about to be introduced to something that you almost only read about in fairy stories. But this is not a fairy story. This is an event that actually happened in a man's life, in the life of Job. And it says one day while Job was with his family, having a normal life, eating and drinking, being merry and celebrating with his family, one of the servants, this is in verse 14, a messenger came to Job and said, the oxen were plowing and the donkeys were grazing nearby. Verse 15, and the Sabeans attacked and carried them off. They put the servants to the sword, and I'm the only one who has escaped to tell you. Guess what happens on this day, which is a normal day? All of a sudden, something tragic happens to Job. He loses his possessions and they kill his servants. And the person blamed for this are the Sabeans. Do you understand this? I want you to see it. But who left God's presence and who is doing this? It's the devil. So what we are about to see here is, although the devil is acting in disguise, we recognize that the Sabeans who get the blame are actually the instruments in Satan's hands. Do you understand this? He's being revealed. But this is all happening, and it's happening in one go. And I want you to understand that as we look around us and we look at the events happening, God is being blamed, or China has been blamed, or whatever has been blamed. But I want you to see the person behind the scene is the man of lawlessness. Okay, you're going to see this. So here's the Sabians. They are being blamed for what happened. While he is still speaking, while this messenger, this is in verse 16. While he is still speaking, another messenger came and said, the fire of God fell from the sky and burned up the sheep and the servants, and I'm the only one who escaped to tell you. Now we get this story, that one of the other messengers come, and it's like in the world, dear friends, we got so many messengers with different stories telling us what's happened. But this messenger comes and he tells his story. He says fire came down from God out of heaven and destroyed the sheep and the servants, and he was the only one left. That's number 2. That's the second messenger. Verse 17, while he is still speaking. I'm always told, dear friends, that things that happen to you that are bad happen in threes, but this is not true here. I'm going to show you something. Here we see verse 17. While he was still speaking, another messenger came and said, so this is the third messenger. The Chaldeans, so it was the Sabians, it was God, now it's the Chaldeans, formed 3 raiding parties and swept down on your camels and carried them off. They put their servants to the sword, and I am only the one who has escaped to tell you. So we have the third messenger who's the only one left to tell the story. Do you understand? These are things that are really happening. In one day, we see that a man who was a wealthy man, a man with great riches, a man who possessed much, a man who feared God and shunned evil, in one day, his whole empire is almost wiped away. I want you to notice that although his possession's been taken, it's almost, well, that's wonderful. But notice, we're going to hit the fourth messenger. In verse 18, while he was still speaking, yet another messenger came and said, so this is the fourth one, dear friends, and things happen not in 1, 2s or 3s, not even in 4s. If we look at planet Earth, you can expect that lots of things are going to happen, and everybody is going to be using that as the message of why things are happening. But listen to this. It says, while he was still speaking, yet another messenger came and said, your sons and daughters were feasting and drinking wine at the older brother's house, when suddenly a mighty wind swept in from the desert and struck the 4 corners of the house. It collapsed on them, and they are dead. I'm the only one who has escaped to tell you. Now, dear friends, this is the most tragic event that can ever happen to parents, and that is the loss of their children. It is categorized when you go to your sociologist or even your psychologist. They say that the event of losing a child in a family is the worst thing that can ever happen to a family. We have Job losing all his possessions right down the line. And then finally we have Job's family, his children, being destroyed. Now, again, I ask you this question. Is it the Sabians? Is it God? Is it the Chaldeans? Here we find out it's supposed to be a freak of nature. It's supposed to be a wind. Who caused all of this? Remember the story in chapter 2, in scene 2. The discussion between Satan and the Lord, where Satan wanted to do damage to Job. Now, through all of this, we read there in verse 20, at this Job got up and tore his robe and shaved his head. Then he fell to the ground and, listen to this, in worship, and said, naked I came from my mother's womb, and naked I will depart. The Lord gave, the Lord has taken away. May the name of the Lord be praised. And this key verse, dear friends, listen to this key verse. In all this, verse 22, Job did not sin by charging God with wrongdoing. What is so amazing about God's children right here, the character quality of God's children, is that we have wisdom and understanding of what's going on, and we are aware that there is an enemy of God. And though all these wicked and horrible things are happening, and sometimes it seems to be the acts of God, like the Sabians did it, like God did it, so they said, like the Chaldeans, like nature, we all blaming something. But the true person behind the scenes is the lawless one, Satan. He is busy. Now I want to close off this study by drawing your attention to chapter 2. On another day, the angels came, it says the sons of God came to present themselves before the Lord. So we find ourselves back again in chapter 2, where the sons of God got together. And I don't want to get into all of that. That's not the point here. But again, we see this, and that Satan presents himself, and we almost have a duplication of the scene, chapter 2, of scene 2. And the Lord said to Satan, where have you come from? And Satan answered the Lord, from roaming through the earth and going back and forth on it. Now I want you to notice, we have a certain understanding of what this roaming up and down and this going back and forth have been. What has he been doing? He's been destroying. You know, in Revelation chapter 9, the devil is actually revealed as the person called destruction, destroyer. Do you understand that? Maybe I should just take your attention to that quickly. Go with me to Revelation chapter 9. And I just want to read there that you can call the devil all kinds of things. You can call him the Sabians. You can call him, God. You can call him the Chaldeans. You can call him all of those things. And sometimes the church has done terrible things. It's done it in the name of God. But I want you to understand, that's not God. God gives life. God doesn't take life. Okay? God is the one that brings into existence. He doesn't destroy. It says there in Revelation chapter 9, okay, are you with me there? I want you to go down, right down to the last thing, verse 11, which is talking about the king that was rulers. So all the demons out there that are doing their things, they have as ruler over them, listen to this. Verse 11, they had as king over them the angel of the abyss, which is the devil, whose name in Hebrew is Abaddon, and in Greek Apollyon. Did you hear that? Which basically means the one who destroys. The angel of destruction. So no matter what you call him here in the book of Job, Sabians, God, Chaldeans, nature, it's still the devil. Okay. And I want you to notice through this story he's been revealed. So here we see that the devil has been roaming on earth up to his destructive power. Then God again says, verse 3, and the Lord said to Satan, have you considered my servant Job? And I want you to understand by this time, he's considered God's servant Job. He's not been kind to him. And remember, what did the devil say? What did Satan say? Take away everything from Job and he will curse you. How did verse 23 and 22 end of Job chapter 1? In all this, Job did not sin by charging God with wrongdoing. And the interesting thing is that Satan then says the reason why is because you haven't allowed me to touch him. Now what I want you to really understand, dear friends, the objective of this presentation was to show you that the man of lawlessness is very busy. He's been busy from the time before the creation of a world in heaven. He was already busy. He has been busy from the creation of the world in the fall of our first parents, Adam and Eve. And through this whole story we see about Job, he has always been the destructive force in this world. And it's time for us to understand this, that the man of lawlessness will be revealed and man will become conscious of him. and be aware of him. His disguise we ripped away from him, and we will see him for who he truly is. The man who is a liar and a murderer from the beginning. I hope that this two-part presentation has helped you to get a proper view of what is really going on behind the scenes. May God bless you.